1st, 2005, and to act on anything related thereto, and it is recommended the town appropriate the amounts shown in the following tabulation under the heading recommended. Schools, recommended FY06, mandated special education, $6,893,107. Regular education, $18,793,618. Salary increases, $1,051,576. Energy, heat, power, $1,060,000. School bus transportation, $326,300. Professional development, $167,000, for a total of $28,291,601. And just a reminder to the body, this is the budget that was in fact addressed earlier this evening. Does anyone wish to speak to this article? All those in favor of the recommendation, oh, excuse me, Ms. White, you're recognized.
Ann White, Precinct 10. I'm sorry if you've already answered this. It just had to deal with a lot of different numbers an hour before the meeting. If you look at what's in the actual warrant for special education, what you had for a recommendation was $7,243,107. There's been a lot of talk about the increased cost of SPED. I'm wondering what the difference is in coming down to $6,893,000. What made the difference? Because I thought a lot of it was sort of mandated.
Dr. Chaffoon, you're recognized for purposes of answering the question.
I have my shoes on. The difference is primarily we get circuit breaker money, which is a reimbursement from the State Department of Ed, and our reimbursement is going to be greater this year than we originally anticipated. So that accounts for the major part of being able to reduce that request for appropriation. The second influence on it are the rates for private placements that we estimated to be going up somewhere in the vicinity of 12 to 15%, which we believe now, according to the Department of Ed, that sets the rates to be about 10%. And the last is a reorganization that will allow us to move some positions, aid positions out of there. So those three influences, but the major influence is more circuit breaker money coming from the Department of Ed in the form of reimbursement.
Mr. Morash, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Steve Morash, Precinct 2. And again, my questions do revolve around mandated special education. And no one could ever speak out against this. However, it's a 24% increase over last year, an extraordinary amount of increase in this. I'd like to know, one, why are we seeing these increases in SPED? And two, this is a mandated state program. I believe this town, back in 1981, like a lot of cities and towns, overwhelmingly voted for Prop 2.5, where mandated state programs are supposed to be paid for by the state. What are we doing to fight that fight? Thank you.
Dr. Chaffoon, you're recognized.
Thank you. The increases really come from a compounding of a problem in which internally there was monitoring and reporting, and that between last December 2004, and the time the town meeting appropriated this fiscal year's budget, 2003, oh, what did I say, 2004? 2003, and then to May 2004, there were several placements that were made that the school committee was unaware of, and thus unable to ask town meeting to appropriate the actual amount of money that it was going to cost. Over the summer, there were more placements that came to light that had been made. The total ended up being somewhere in the vicinity of 22 or 23 placements, additional placements between one school year and and the following school year. So we have, in essence, been trying to play catch-up this year, and we inherited a deficit in special education well over $1 million, and that has been whittled down to a more reasonable number that's contained in another article that you'll be presented with on a subsequent night. We have to pay for those. As far as, what's happening with unfunded mandates, we continue to have them regardless of, what we passed as a Commonwealth in 1981. What has happened was the circuit breaker is an attempt to close the gap with those unfunded mandates, and there's another movement among educators to get special ed transportation included in the circuit breaker in subsequent fiscal years. But the short answer is that the deficit from this year has to be accounted for. We not only have to make up the money this year, but that's why we have an unusually large request for next year going forward, is that those placements are still with us and they need to be appropriately budgeted.
Thank you. Senator Joyce, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. I'd like to just expand upon those remarks a little bit with respect to special education. Several years ago, you'll recall there was a budget impasse where we all saw nightly images of then Senate President Tom Birmingham and then Speaker of the House and former Milton Representative Tom Finneran sitting on the balcony, and there was a seemingly almost a personal note to this and some rivalries and such. I'll tell you what was really driving that budget impasse more than any other single issue. It was the issue of special education. This is a very important issue, not just here in Milton, indeed not just throughout the Commonwealth, but throughout the nation. We in Massachusetts enjoyed a standard whereby our children with special needs would receive the maximum feasible benefit with respect to their public education. And I think that was a badge of honor. After all, we are indeed a commonwealth, and certainly shouldn't we want to provide each child, including those children with special needs, with the maximum feasible benefit. The other states, all 49 other states, have a lesser standard. That standard was referred to as free and appropriate. There were constant battles, certainly understandable, where a child with special needs, for example, could move into a town in August and blow a hole in the town's budget for so-called regular education, and we would often have divisive and counterproductive battles between advocates for special education and those for regular education. I mentioned this was a national issue. We saw several years ago that Senator Jeffords actually left the Republican Party, Senator Jeffords, the retiring senator from Vermont, because of the federal government's failure to fund special needs beyond a certain cost as had been promised way back in the 1970s. In any event, the battle was lost by the Senate. Our position was to maintain this maximum feasible benefit. The Superintendents Association, the School Committee Associations, and the Mass Municipal Association were arguing for the free and appropriate, which was a lesser standard. And it's unfortunate, but it's, I guess, a result of our fiscal realities that we did go to that lesser standard. We also made some other significant changes to the positive, however. Those included the implementation of the circuit breaker legislation you've heard referred to. I was a co-sponsor of that legislation, wherein the state steps in and pays for a percentage of all special education costs beyond $30,000 plus or minus for the first time ever. You've seen that the state finances have plummeted in recent years after 8 or so years of double-digit growth. Beginning in 2001, the state finances fell precipitously. We were losing on one quarter about 25% of revenue on average, about 15% in revenue. At the same time, our costs like healthcare were rising exponentially. About the only area where we did increase funding was in special education. And that is to help absorb this cost, this increased cost. In Milton, in fiscal year '05, that is the year that we're in currently, Milton will receive a reimbursement of $713,936. That's $269,445 more than last year. The cost of residential special education programs has increased more than 200% over the past 10 years. The reality is the cost is going up for all of us, and the state is indeed stepping in to pay a greater cost, including in these difficult times.
Mr. Shields, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. John Shields, Town Meeting Member from Precinct 2. Mr. Moderator, I did attend about a month ago a couple of meetings of the Warrant Committee when they were kind of batting around like a tennis ball that $500,000 that we all heard about between public safety and schools. I applaud the efforts of town officials, the selectmen, and the school committee and the Warrant Committee to come up with this budget that was presented to us this evening. I really have to tell the town meeting from what I saw in the 2 nights I was at the Warrant Committee, no finance committee in the history of this town or any other should have to go through what these people were going through. It was gut-wrenching, and it was, if you were in the audience, you could really feel it. Earlier this evening, Mr. Moderator, we were presented with a school presentation. I would note that we've talked about the special education increase. We talked earlier that the utilities budget was up by about $200,000. If you look at the salary increases of $1 million this year, my question to the school department is, how much of that $1,051,000 is negotiated raises, and how much of it is bump-ups or lane changes within the existing contract? We talked earlier about 20 to 24 additional positions being lost, and I was wondering how much of that is due to I know some of it is because of SPED and some of it is because of the utilities, which is only $200,000. How much of it is because of the salary increases that would lose these positions? And I'd like to know, what is the negotiated raises? Last year, Mrs. Stillman at town meeting said that they had built into the budget a 3.5% increase. I'd like to know how much of an increase was negotiated in a contract and how much were bump-ups within the existing contract. Thank you.
Dr. Jaffoon, you recognized.
Thank you. We estimate at the beginning of the budget process that on our salary schedule, which is laid out like a grid, you get credit as you gain more experience going down the grid and across the grid for additional education. At a full complement of teachers, we estimated that to be approximately $500,000. That, of course, is going to be less because we're going to have 10 fewer teaching positions. So that will be less than $500,000. The school committee has reached a tentative agreement with the Teachers Association. Until that agreement is ratified by the Teachers Association, the school committee nor I am at liberty to divulge the particulars of that. Suffice it to say that we were carrying a contingency, and based upon the successful tentative agreement, we were able to reduce our request substantially.
Mr. Doyle, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. I would like to just for a second follow up on Senator Joyce's comment, having served for 5 years on a Board of Education in a state other than Massachusetts. If you underestimate and underfund the cost of special education under the law, you run the risk of considerable litigation costs, which, when combined with that underfunding, exceed what would have been an appropriate appropriation for special education. Don't go there.
Dr. Lowney, you're recognized.
Jay Lowney, Precinct 11. First off, I'd like to rise and support the proposed school budget, and I appreciate the hard work that the leaders of the school have been able to work out in the last few weeks because we've had quite an uproar in the town. There is, it's becoming painfully clear that the town is going to need more money to run its schools in the future. As David Colton had said, we're in a crisis and waiting. There's one thing that I just don't want to let go, though. We are actually raising a fee here. It's the trash fee, and people should be aware of that. So I've made a list. Comcast, state tax, FCC fee, Verizon, long distance, federal tax, federal universal service fee, FCC fee, Verizon local, state tax, local tax, federal excise tax, federal subscriber line charge, N-Star Electric, renewable energy fee, energy conservation fee. If you have a car, sales tax, excise tax, registration fee, gas tax, driver's license fee, tax on repairs, toll and tunnel fee, federal income tax, Social Security tax, Medicare tax, state income tax, food beverage tax, sales tax, water and sewage tax, town trash fee. So from the moment you get up out of your bed, which you pay a sales tax on, in the house, which you pay a property tax on, going into the shower, which you pay a water and sewage tax on, getting into your car, which you pay a sales tax, excise tax, and a gas tax on, get to work so you can pay your state income tax, federal income tax, Social Security and Medicare tax, and if you have a small business, you're in a lot of trouble, to maybe going out for lunch, which you pay a sales tax, driving back to your home in the same car, where you may watch a little TV, which you pay a cable state tax and an FCC fee. You might make a phone call, which you may end up paying a tax on the Verizon state and local tax and FCC fee, federal subscriber line charge, to putting the kids to bed again, the sales tax on the bed, to shutting off the lights supplied by the electricity, on the fees including renewable energy and conservation. It's kind of crazy. It's sad to say, but there are only really two taxes that we have any kind of control over. One is maybe the state income tax, the flat tax, and the other one is Proposition 2.5 overrides or property tax. So it's becoming increasingly painfully clear that it's going to take more money to run our town. And it has to come from somewhere. School makes a good point. They've been level funded for 4 years straight. We saw it right up here. Level funded 4 years. I mean, just inflation alone doesn't account for that. You can't run schools like that. But the money has to come from somewhere. We have a lot of budgets. We have family budgets. We have local budgets. We have state. We have federal budgets. But we have family budgets too. And a lot of those family budgets are level funded as well. I'm sure a lot of people here are on fixed incomes. Not everybody in this room is guaranteed a raise next year. So my point here is that the state flat tax was supposed to be 5%. It's 5.3%. We need to take that back. There's a supposed $700 million surplus in the state. In fact,
Dr. Lowney, you're beginning to stray a little bit outside the article.
I'm sorry?
You're beginning to stray outside the...
Okay. Well, the point is, it has to come from somewhere. And if the people of Milton would be able to tolerate an increase in Proposition 2.5 override, if we got the flat tax back to 5%, it would buffer the problem with with us being able to support our own town. And that's my point there.
Does anyone else wish to speak to the article? Seeing none, all those in favor of the recommendation of the warrant committee say aye. Aye. Opposed, no. It's unanimous. I'd entertain a motion to adjourn. Seconded. All those in favor? Opposed? We adjourn until 7:30 p.m. tomorrow evening.